For my latest short film Together, I needed all of these flies in my movie. So in this video I will talk about how I made those flies, and you're thinking that's oddly specific, but maybe you need some flies for a corpse or a trash can or something like that to really bring out the disgustingness. So for some of you this video might be helpful, and for others I'll see you in the next one. When my character was developed and my script was finished and I realized I needed these flies, I was first thinking that maybe I could take a bunch of spheres and animate them around, because in my mind these spheres would have been indistinguishable because of the motion blur. But during my testing I discovered that when these spheres change direction, there's a couple of frames when they are perfectly still and the motion blur is not hiding the fact that these are just spheres. So I had to go back to the drawing table and make an actual fly model just because of this reason. So in Cinema 4D I made a pretty simple fly model like this. It's made up of a bunch of simple geometry like a capsule and a sphere and cylinders. And what I did was I just bunched all of these into a null object. And then I took the wings and put a Vibrate Tag on them just to make them flat. We're never going to see this model in a close-up, so it's perfectly fine to use a crude model like this. And even if I were to take this rendered footage out of Cinema 4D and scale it up so it looks like all of these flies are directly in front of the camera, I know I will blur it out and put a lot of motion blur on it. So I knew right from the start that a simple model will do. When I was done modeling, I went into animating all of these flies. And the first thing I did, I took the model and put a Vibrate Tag on it like this. So now I have this fly just moving across the frame like this. But here I stumble upon a problem, because if you look closely here, you can see that the fly is not facing the direction it's moving. So it's sideways to the direction. And I knew that this would be very apparent in the final render if I had all these bunch of flies in the wrong direction they were traveling. So after a bit of researching and tutorialing, I realized that I needed to take my Vibrate Tag and convert it to actual keyframes. Because then you can take another tag in Cinema 4D and put it on the fly and make it facing the path that it's traveling. So let's do this. First I went into animation here, and under functions you go to bake objects. And we only need position here so we can deselect all the other properties. So everything looks good, and I will press OK. So now you can see that we have all of these keyframes. And it didn't solve our problem because the fly is still not facing the direction. But if we take a align to path tag and just place that on our model here, the fly is actually doing what it's supposed to do. It's facing the direction of travel, but it's using the wrong orientation of the fly. So we need to go in and fix that. So what I did was I took all of my geometry and just put that into another null object. So now we can take this and rotate it so that the fly is facing the correct direction. So I can see that we need to rotate the green axis. Okay, so let's see if this looks good on this fly. Yeah, looks pretty cool. Now we have our fly facing the correct direction it's traveling in. So let's go out to our camera view and just check it out. And we can see that it's doing its thing, looking good. From here on out, I just duplicated what I did a couple of times to get this bunch of flies across the frame like this. And I made sure that the Vibrate Tag that I was baking into these flies were all a little bit random. So I didn't bake the exact parameters from the Vibrate Tag. So that looks pretty good. And now it was time to just render this asset out. And I made sure that the flies are not moving out from the frame in this rendered out sequence. Because in composition, you don't want the fly just to be cut in half because it's moving out from the frame. When I had all of these rendered flies in a sequence, I brought them into After Effects and did all my compositing. And I have this example here where using a bunch of layers of this sequence, I'm putting some of these flies scaled down in the background behind this monster, and I'm also having a layer between my actor and the character. I'm also taking this asset and scaling it up very large so we can get flies moving across the frame just in front of the camera like this. But here I'm making sure that I'm blurring it and putting a lot of motion blur on it, just to make sure that we don't get a detailed view of this basic crude model of the fly. And here's an example why it was important to actually have a model of a fly instead of spheres. If I were to use spheres instead of this crude model, that will be very evident here in this shot. Instead of this shape of a fly, you would just get a little blurred out circle. I also want you to note that the sound design here in this entire sequence is selling this effect of these flies. So I spent a little time doing the sound design on these flies by using synthesis and also finding sound of actual flies on the internet. And then merging these two together to get this disgusting buzzing sound of all of these flies. It's time to wrap up this video. I know this was a very specific video, but maybe some of you out there can use some of these tips in this video. And also, I am thinking about taking all of these things I'm creating, these assets, and making some kind of a digital store maybe. Would you be interested in something like that? Let me know in the comment section. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!